Guideline 2. Give information on language and symbols.
Communicate through languages that create shared understanding. Students have at their disposal different forms of presentation, both linguistic and non-linguistic. The vocabulary, which can clarify concepts for one student, may be opaque and difficult for another to understand. An equal sign may help some students understand that the two sides of an equation must be proportionate, but it could cause confusion for a student who does not understand its meaning. A graph that illustrates the relationship between two variables may be useful for one student and incomprehensible or disorienting for another. An image or illustration that has meaning for some students may have very different meanings for students from different cultural or family backgrounds. Consequently, inequalities arise when information is proposed to all students through a single form of presentation. An important educational strategy is to ensure that alternative forms of presentation are provided not only for accessibility, but also for the clarity and comprehensibility of all students.
Clarify vocabulary and symbols.
Construct the meaning of words, symbols, and numbers using different forms of representation. The semantic elements through which information is presented, words, symbols, numbers, and icons, are accessible in a completely different way to students with different backgrounds, languages, and lexical knowledge. To ensure accessibility to everyone, key vocabulary, as well as words, labels, icons, and symbols, should be linked or associated with alternative representations of their meaning, for example, a glossary or an attached definition. Idiomatic, archaic expressions, culturally elitist phrases, and slang should be translated.
Tips. Teach terminology and symbols, especially in ways that foster a connection with students' experience and previous knowledge.
Provide graphic symbols with alternative descriptions of the text.
Highlight how complex terms, expressions, or equations are composed of simpler words or symbols.
Insert in the text a support system for vocabulary and symbols, for example, hyperlinks or footnotes, definitions, explanations, illustrations, cards.
Insert in the text the notation specific to the particular sector, the lesser-known properties and theorems, idiomatic expressions, academic language, figurative language, mathematical language, jargon, archaic language, colloquial expressions, and dialect.
Clarify the syntax and syntactic structure. Explain the structure and properties that characterize a system such as grammar, musical notation, taxonomies, and equations. Individual significant elements, such as words or numbers, can be combined to create other meanings. These new meanings, however, depend on understanding the rules or structures of the way in which those elements are combined, such as the syntax in a sentence or the properties of equations. When the syntax of a sentence or the structure of a graphic representation is not obvious or known to students, their understanding is affected. To ensure that all students have equal access to information, alternatives must be provided in such a way as to clarify, or make more explicit, the syntactic or structural relationships between significant elements.
Tips. Clarify the little-known syntax, in language or in mathematical formulas, or the underlying structure, in diagrams, graphs, illustrations, extended statements or narratives, through appropriate means. Highlight structural relationships or make them more explicit.
Make connections with previously learned structures. Make the relationships between elements explicit, for example, by highlighting keywords in an essay, the links between ideas in a concept map, etc. Clarify that individual elements of meaning, such as words or numbers, can be combined to create new meanings. Facilitate the decoding of texts, mathematical notations, and symbols. Make sure that the text and symbols do not hinder the learning objective. The ability to easily decode words, numbers, or symbols that have been presented in an encoded format, for example, visual symbols for text, tactile symbols for Braille, algebraic expressions for relationships, requires some experience on the part of each student, but some of them will achieve their automation faster than others. Students need consistent and meaningful exposure to symbols so that they can understand and use them effectively. The lack of speed or automation significantly increases the cognitive load of decoding, thus reducing the ability to process and understand information. To ensure that all students have equal access to knowledge, especially when the ability to decode is at the heart of the education program, it is important to provide options that reduce the barriers that decoding raises for students who do not have knowledge or are not familiar with symbols. Tips: allow the use of text-to-speech. Use automatic voicing with digital math notation, MathML. Use digital text with an accompanying human voice recording, such as Daisy Talking Books. Allow flexibility and easy access to multiple notation presentations, if necessary, for example, formulas, word problems, graphics. Provide clarification on notation through lists of key terms.
Promote understanding between different languages. Use translations, descriptions, gestures, and images to support learning in unknown or complex languages. The language of curricular materials is usually monolingual, but classroom students are often not, so promoting interlinguistic understanding is particularly important. For new students with the predominant language, for example, English in American schools, or for students who learn the official language, the predominant language at school, the accessibility of information is significantly reduced when language alternatives are not available. Providing such possibilities, especially for key information or vocabulary, is an important aspect of accessibility. Make all key information available in the dominant language, for example, English, and in their native language, for example, Spanish, for students with limited knowledge of English, and, in sign language, ASL, for deaf students. Connect vocabulary keywords to definitions and pronouncements both in the dominant languages and in those of cultural heritage. Define the vocabulary specific to the sector of activity, e.g., map legend, in social studies, using both terms specific to the sector of activity and common expressions. Provide electronic translation tools or links to multilingual glossaries on the web. Integrate visual and non-linguistic supports for understanding vocabulary, images, videos, etc. Expose information through multiple media. Make learning come to life with simulations, graphics, activities, and videos. Teaching materials are often in text format. But the text is an inadequate format for presenting many concepts and for explaining some of the processes. In addition, the text is a particularly difficult form of presentation for students who have problems with this type of material or who have language problems. Offering alternative ways, in particular illustrations, simulations, images, or interactive graphics, can make the information in the text more understandable for every learner and accessible to some who would find it absolutely incomprehensible through the text. Tips: present key concepts in a form of symbolic representation, e.g. an expository text or a mathematical equation, with an alternative form, for example, illustration, danced movement, diagram, tables, models, videos, comics, storyboarding, photography, animation, physical or virtual simulation. Create explicit links between the information provided in the texts and any accompanying representations of that information in illustrations, equations, graphs or diagrams.